Welcome back to Mormon Insights. If you've wondered whether this controversial book was divinely revealed, secretly borrowed, or stranger, hit subscribe. What if the Book of Mormon's origin story isn't what most believe? Not faithful, not skeptical. Something hidden in plain sight for centuries, buried in historical documents, ancient manuscripts, and testimonies. Scholars on both sides acknowledge it, but rarely discuss it together. Today, we pull back the curtain on the secret origins of the Book of Mormon. Stay until the end. The final piece changes everything. Before we continue, when did you last question what you were told about this book? Most accepted, a version of this story, in the comments. Tell me, what's one thing you always wanted to know about the Book of Mormon's origin? I read every one. Let's go back to 1820s upstate New York. A young man, Joseph Smith, lived in a spiritually charged region. Historians call it the burned-over district. Religious revival fires swept through intensely, leaving nothing left to ignite. Camp meetings, competing preachers, apocalyptic visions, faith healers. This was the atmosphere Joseph Smith breathed daily. The standard account: Joseph Smith receives a vision, led to golden plates in Palmyra, New York. Through God's power, he translates an ancient record of people who sailed from the Near East to the Americas. The result? A 531-page scripture millions of Latter-day Saints consider the most correct book on earth. Critics tell a different story. They point to manuscript found by Solomon Spalding around 1812. Some argue it was the actual literary source used by Sidney Rigdon as a template. They point to geography debates, anachronisms, lack of archaeological evidence for horses, steel, and chariots in pre-Columbian America. Both sides have argued this for 200 years. And here is where it gets genuinely fascinating. Both sides are missing something. Here is the twist most documentaries, YouTube videos, and Sunday school lessons will never tell you. The Book of Mormon's translation process, described by actual eyewitnesses, doesn't match typical presentations. Not even close. Emma Smith, Joseph's wife, sat behind a curtain while he dictated. She described a deeply strange, compelling process. She said Joseph would place a chocolate-colored stone into a hat, bury his face to block light. Then words and sentences would appear luminously before him. He would read them aloud. Emma, or other scribes, would write them down. If a word was incorrect, the text wouldn't move forward. It would remain until corrected. Let that land for a moment. This is not a man glancing at golden plates, translating like an ancient linguist. This is far more controlled, precise, and historically far more documented than most people realize. 3 scribes, including Emma, Martin Harris, and Oliver Cowdery, described variations. This is in the historical record, in the Joseph Smith Papers, a rigorously compiled archive available for anyone to read. Now, here's the question. If the translation was this precise, this controlled, does that make the Book of Mormon more credible or less? Think about it carefully. I want real answers down there. Now let's talk about the ancient world side. For decades, critics stated the Book of Mormon's claim of a family leaving Jerusalem around 600 BC and keeping records on metal plates was absurd. Metal plates for writing simply did not exist in the ancient Near East at that time, they said, until they did. The discovery of the copper scroll among the Dead Sea Scrolls, the Darius inscriptions, the Purgi tablets, and most strikingly, the brass plates of Laban referenced in the text itself. These began to look far less like fantasy and far more like authentic cultural detail. Then there is the chiasmus question. In 1967, a young BYU student named John Welch, studying in Germany, was reading about chiasmus, a complex ancient Hebrew literary structure in which phrases are mirrored in reverse order. A structure used throughout the Old Testament as a poetic and mnemonic device. Welch had a thought. He opened the Book of Mormon, and what he found was remarkable. Extensive chiastic structures throughout the text. Structures that a 23-year-old farmer in 1829, with a third-grade education, would have had no access to, no knowledge of, and no reason to fake. Now, scholars debate the significance of this. Some say it is deliberate authorial craft from an ancient source. Others say it could be coincidental pattern matching in any long text. But the debate itself is the point. This is not a simple story. It has never been a simple story. Here is something European audiences find striking. When Latter-day Saint missionaries arrived in Britain in 1837, 8 years after the Book of Mormon was published, They found thousands of working-class Christians in places like Preston, Manchester, and Hereford who read the text and converted almost immediately, not because they were naive, but because many were deeply literate biblical readers who found in the Book of Mormon a theological framework. It answered questions the Bible had left open about ancient America, Israel's lost tribes, and continuous revelation. These were not simple people being fooled. These were mill workers and weavers reading critically and choosing. Why does that matter? Because it tells us something about what the text actually contains, regardless of where you think it came from. And that brings us to the final piece, the one nobody talks about. Even the most secular historians who have spent decades studying this period now acknowledge something quietly extraordinary. Whether or not you believe in its divine origins, the Book of Mormon is one of the most internally complex, narratively consistent, and literarily sophisticated documents produced in 19th century America. It contains consistent named characters across hundreds of pages. It references internal geography with precision. It has a coherent legal system, a coherent military culture, a coherent theological development across centuries of fictional or historical time. The idea that it was improvised orally in roughly 65 working days by a man who could barely write a coherent letter is, by any honest literary measure, astonishing. You do not have to be a believer to find that astonishing. Many secular literary scholars already do. So where does that leave us? The origins of the Book of Mormon are not simple. They are not the clean faith-promoting story, and they are not the clean debunking story. They are something stranger, richer, and far more worth your time to investigate honestly. And I want to know where you land on this. After everything we just walked through, what do you think is the most compelling piece of evidence, for or against? Tell me in the comments. Be specific. Be honest, this channel is a space where every serious answer gets respect. If this video made you think differently about something you thought you already understood, that is exactly what Mormon Insights is here for. We go deeper than the Sunday school version, and we go deeper than the YouTube debunking version. We find the actual history, and we let you decide. Subscribe to Mormon Insights right now if you want more of this. Every week we go into the stories, the documents, the history, and the questions that most channels are too afraid to touch. Hit the bell so you never miss an upload. And share this video with one person, just one, who you think deserves a more honest conversation about this topic. The Book of Mormon's secret origins were never really secret. They were just waiting for someone to look carefully enough. We looked together. See you in the next one.